Shay, Caitlin Clark ain't won nothing. She haven't proven anything. Especially to talk to somebody like you talking to Stephen White like that. Stephen White just took that team to the semis. They was winning without you. They prepping up. Look, Stephen White is literally. I'm telling you, Stephen White want Raven Johnson as point guards. I'm telling you, she. I told y'all this last year. If you really look at Stephen White's system, it's predicated on ball movement.
For months, Caitlin Clark has been the center of every conversation surrounding the Indiana Fever. Every highlight, every deep three-pointer, every sold-out arena, and every headline has revolved around Caitlin Clark. But now a completely different story has exploded into public view. This is no longer about scoring records, television ratings, or rookie stardom. This is about a growing question surrounding Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White. What happens when a franchise superstar and a championship-level coach appear to see the game differently? That question suddenly became impossible to ignore after a tense sideline moment sparked a national debate. Cheryl Miller, one of the most respected voices in basketball history, looked at the situation and did not focus on officiating. Cheryl Miller did not focus on media narratives. Cheryl Miller focused directly on the relationship between Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White. The concern was not simply frustration. Every great player gets frustrated. Every elite competitor has emotional moments. The concern was whether those emotions had crossed a line and begun affecting the entire Indiana Fever team. Indiana entered the season with enormous expectations. Caitlin Clark was expected to elevate the franchise. Stephanie White was expected to guide that talent into a championship contender. Instead, losses began piling up, frustrations became visible, and questions about accountability started surfacing. What made this situation different was that it unfolded in front of cameras. Fans watched, analysts reacted, former players weighed in, and suddenly the conversation shifted from whether Caitlin Clark could dominate opponents to whether Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White were fully aligned on how that domination should happen. That is where Cheryl Miller's comments changed the entire discussion. Because Cheryl Miller was not talking about talent. Cheryl Miller was talking about trust, discipline, and whether Caitlin Clark was willing to embrace the demands that Stephanie White was placing on her game.
But when it spills over and when the coach has to basically say, hey, you know what, Caitlin, enough is enough. This is too disruptive. In and out, take a seat. What do you think?
I agree. I think it's frustration. I'm not like the best lip reader, but I feel like Stephanie White did say defense a couple times. And Caitlin Clark was in foul trouble this game. And obviously we know how things are being called. So I think it is a lot of frustration, but it's also like not that crazy. This isn't the first time we've seen this. It doesn't have some deeper meaning to it. I've had moments like that with coaches. I think it speaks to...
The first major issue raised by Cheryl Miller centered on disruption. According to Cheryl Miller, frustration is normal. Basketball history is filled with star players arguing with coaches. Championships have been won by teams that fought internally. Competitive tension is often part of greatness. But Cheryl Miller highlighted something more important. There is a difference between emotional intensity and team disruption. When Stephanie White appeared to intervene during the heated exchange, the focus shifted away from one player and onto the entire Fever organization. Suddenly, the conversation was not about Caitlin Clark's scoring ability. It became about how the team was functioning collectively. That distinction matters. A coach can tolerate frustration. A coach can tolerate disagreement. A coach can tolerate emotional reactions. What becomes difficult is when those reactions begin affecting teammates. Kelsey Mitchell allegedly stepped in to help calm the situation. Whether fans agree with that interpretation or not, the larger point remains significant. The Fever were not simply battling an opponent. The Fever were battling internal frustration at the same time. For Stephanie White, that creates an impossible challenge. Every timeout becomes more complicated. Every adjustment becomes harder to communicate. Every defensive correction becomes more difficult to implement, and defense was at the center of this discussion. Throughout the game, Caitlin Clark found herself in foul trouble. Opposing teams increasingly targeted her defensively. The Fever struggled to maintain consistency. Portland gained confidence and eventually took control. The result was not just another loss. The result was a loss that amplified existing concerns. Fans started questioning leadership. Analysts started questioning chemistry. And Cheryl Miller started questioning whether frustration had reached a level where it was influencing winning basketball. For Indiana, that is a dangerous place to be, because expectations were never supposed to be about merely competing. The expectations surrounding Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White were championship expectations. When those expectations collide with public frustration, every interaction becomes magnified. Every timeout becomes a headline. Every disagreement becomes a national story. And every loss becomes evidence for critics looking to prove that something deeper is happening behind the scenes.
When it becomes disruptive, and then when and that's when even, Kelsey Mitchell kind of chimed in and said, like, you need to go stand over here and let us just regain calm in our huddle. When it becomes that disruptive to the entire team, somebody has to step in.
Well, that's my question for both of you, because you've played on teams where there are high expectations. You know what that pressure can be like. Are these moments actually impacting their ability to win games? That's the question. Is there more to this? Because at the end of the day,
The psychological side of this story may be even more fascinating than the basketball side. Caitlin Clark arrived in the WNBA carrying unprecedented expectations. Every defensive mistake is analyzed. Every turnover is replayed. Every emotional reaction becomes content for millions of viewers. Very few players in league history have entered with that level of scrutiny. That pressure changes everything. Cheryl Miller and Sue Bird both hinted at a reality many fans overlook. Opponents are no longer testing whether Caitlin Clark can shoot. Everyone already knows she can shoot. Now opponents are testing every other part of Caitlin Clark's game. Can Caitlin Clark defend consistently? Can Caitlin Clark stay disciplined in foul trouble? Can Caitlin Clark remain composed when opponents target her physically? Can Caitlin Clark respond when teams attack her defensively? Those are completely different challenges from what made her famous. Throughout basketball history, superstar guards have faced similar transitions. Early success creates attention. Attention creates scouting. Scouting creates targeted game plans. Then the real evolution begins. That appears to be exactly what Stephanie White may be trying to accelerate. According to the discussion, Stephanie White wants Caitlin Clark to become a more complete player. Not just a scorer, not just a passer, not just a highlight machine. A complete player. That process is rarely comfortable. Great coaches often demand changes that stars initially resist. The reason is simple. The coach sees the future version of the player. The player is often focused on what already works. That tension has existed throughout basketball history. When Cheryl Miller discussed learning tendencies of every opposing player, she was describing the mindset required for elite defense. She was describing preparation, discipline, study. Those qualities are often developed through difficult coaching. If Stephanie White is pushing Caitlin Clark toward that next level, then moments of friction may actually be part of the process. The challenge is making sure the friction remains productive rather than destructive. Because once frustration starts outweighing growth, the relationship becomes vulnerable. And when a coach-player relationship becomes vulnerable, championship aspirations become vulnerable too.
Trying to play. But what CC and her fans don't realize is Stephanie White is trying to expand Caitlin Clark's game. Caitlin Clark is not willing to listen. She's not willing to buy into the team concept. That's the problem here. And I don't know why all of y'all are crying and saying, oh, she needs to get traded to another team. Bro, how many teams in the league gonna allow Caitlin Clark to play that style? Like, have y'all ever thought about that? How many teams in this league gonna allow Caitlin Clark to play?
This is where the story becomes bigger than one timeout or one disagreement. The Indiana Fever have invested their future around Caitlin Clark. The franchise's visibility has skyrocketed. Attendance has increased. Television audiences have expanded. National attention follows every move Caitlin Clark makes. That means every relationship inside the organization carries enormous weight. If Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White are aligned, Indiana possesses one of the most exciting foundations in professional basketball. If Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White are not aligned, the consequences become much larger. Team chemistry suffers. Player development slows. Championship timelines get delayed. The criticism focuses heavily on style of play. One side argues that Stephanie White's system emphasizes ball movement, structure, and collective execution. The other side centers around maximizing Caitlin Clark's unique offensive gifts. Finding the balance between those philosophies could determine the future of the franchise. History shows that championship teams eventually solve these conflicts. The greatest coaches challenge great players. The greatest players eventually adapt. The question is how long that process takes, because opponents are not waiting. Every team in the WNBA is studying Indiana. Every team is analyzing Caitlin Clark. Every team is searching for weaknesses. And every team understands that internal tension can be just as valuable as any tactical advantage. That is why Cheryl Miller's comments resonated so strongly. She was not simply criticizing Caitlin Clark. She was highlighting a crossroads. One path leads toward growth, accountability, and a stronger partnership with Stephanie White. The other path leads toward continued public friction and increasing distractions. The next few months may determine which path Indiana ultimately follows.